In 524 BCE, 50,000 men marched into the Egyptian desert. Not one returned. No bodies, no weapons, no trace. For 25 centuries, the disappearance of the Persian army remained one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. This is the story of how ambition, nature, and time conspired to erase an entire civilization's military might, and how modern archaeology is finally uncovering the truth buried beneath the sands. Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great, inherited the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. But inheritance wasn't enough. Egypt fell to his armies in 525 BCE, yet one prize eluded him. The oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis.
The future is veiled.
The oracle had declared him illegitimate. For a god king, this was intolerable. Cambyses assembled 50,000 of his finest soldiers, a force large enough to conquer nations, and gave them one command: destroy the oracle and everyone who served it. They departed from Thebes, modern-day Luxor, carrying supplies for a 7-day march across 400 miles of desert. It would be their last journey. Ancient historian Herodotus, writing 75 years after the event, recorded what happened next. The army reached the oasis of El Karga, roughly halfway to their destination. They resupplied, they rested. Then they marched westward into the deeper desert. And then, nothing. 7 days after leaving El Karga, the army should have reached Siwa. But the oracle remained untouched. No survivors arrived, no messengers returned. 50,000 men had simply ceased to exist. According to Herodotus, locals claimed the army was consuming their midday meal when a catastrophic south wind arose. A wind carrying mountains of sand that buried them alive where they stood. For centuries, scholars dismissed Herodotus's account as myth. But modern meteorology reveals a terrifying truth. The Egyptian desert produces some of Earth's most violent sandstorms. The Khamsin, Arabic for 50, marking the days these storms can persist, generates walls of sand 3,000 feet high, traveling at speeds exceeding 80 miles per hour. These storms don't just reduce visibility, they suffocate, flay exposed skin, and bury everything in their path under tons of sand within minutes. Temperature fluctuations of 40 degrees in hours cause disorientation and rapid dehydration. Without modern weather prediction, the Persian army would have had seconds of warning. In ancient military formation, densely packed, weighted down with bronze armor and supplies, 50,000 men would have had nowhere to run. The hunt for Cambyses' lost army has obsessed archaeologists for over a century. Dozens of expeditions scoured the desert between Luxor and Siwa. They found Ptolemaic settlements, Roman outposts, prehistoric tools, but no Persian army. The challenge was mathematical. 400 miles of desert, constantly reshaped by wind. Even 50,000 bodies occupies a relatively small area when buried. Finding them meant locating approximately 1 square mile in a 100,000 square mile search zone. A needle in a sandbox the size of Colorado. But in the year 2000, everything changed. 2 Italian archaeologists, Angelo and Alfredo Castiglioni, weren't searching for the army. They were mapping ancient trade routes using satellite imagery when they noticed something unusual. In a remote valley west of El Karga, the Castiglioni team found bronze weapons, Persian design, 5th century BCE, then jewelry, then human remains, then more remains. The artifacts were scattered across miles, suggesting catastrophic dispersal. The evidence told a story of chaos. Weapons were found separate from bodies, suggesting soldiers dropped them while fleeing or were torn from their grasp. Skeletal remains showed signs of abrasion consistent with sandblasting. Most significantly, the bones were scattered, not in formation but in patterns suggesting violent dispersal by extreme wind force. Carbon dating confirmed the remains were approximately 2,500 years old. Metallurgical analysis matched Persian Empire bronze composition, but the full army, 50,000 men, was still missing. These few hundred scattered remains were likely outriders or an advance unit. Geologists studying the Western Desert have documented something remarkable. The desert surface today is 30 to 40 feet higher than it was in 500 BCE. 25 centuries of accumulated sand has created an entirely new landscape atop the old one. The army isn't lost. It's entombed beneath millions of tons of sediment. Ground-penetrating radar reveals promising anomalies, large metallic signatures at depths of 30 to 50 feet, exactly where we'd expect to find a buried army from 524 BCE. But excavation at these depths, across miles of desert, presents extraordinary challenges. The Egyptian government restricts large-scale digging due to archaeological preservation concerns. The sites are remote, requiring massive logistical support. And paradoxically, the same wind that buried the army continues to reshape the desert, potentially reburying excavation sites within months. The lost Persian army joins a haunting catalog of mass disappearances throughout history. The Roman 9th Legion, 5,000 men, vanished in Britain around 120 CE, never to be found. The colony of Roanoke disappeared without trace in 1590. In 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 vanished with 239 people aboard. In our age of satellites and GPS, we still cannot find it. These mysteries share common threads: hubris, unforgiving environments, and the humbling realization that Earth still keeps secrets. But unlike modern disappearances, ancient ones have something we lack: time. Time for evidence to be buried, eroded, scattered beyond recognition. The Persian army's fate reminds us that nature's power dwarfs human ambition. 50,000 soldiers, an unstoppable military force, were no match for wind and sand. Their disappearance wasn't supernatural. It was physics. Beneath the grand historical narrative lies a more intimate tragedy. Each of those 50,000 men had a name, a family, perhaps children who waited for a father who never returned home. They died far from Persia, serving a king's wounded pride, pursuing an objective that ultimately meant nothing. We'll never know their individual stories, but archaeological evidence provides glimpses. Personal items found at the site, rings, amulets, dice, suggest these were men who carried pieces of home with them. One ring bore an inscription: "May I return." He didn't. The desert preserved their final moments in terrible detail. Bodies found in crouched positions, hands over faces, the instinctive futile gesture against suffocating sand. Some skeletal remains show individuals clustered together. Perhaps soldiers who died trying to shield one another from the storm. The Bedouin tribes who've inhabited this desert for millennia have always known what the Persians learned too late. You don't conquer the desert, you negotiate with it. Their oral traditions contain stories of armies swallowed by sand, Stories Western archaeologists once dismissed as folklore. Modern desert survival requires yielding to the environment's rhythms, travel during cool hours, never fight a sandstorm, find shelter or lie flat and wait, carry 3 times the water you think you need. The Bedouins say the desert forgives preparation but punishes arrogance. Cambyses sent 50,000 men to impose his will on nature and culture. The desert responded as it always does, with indifference. The soldiers weren't enemies to be fought. They were simply organisms in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Khamsin doesn't distinguish between emperors and slaves. Despite recent discoveries, fundamental questions remain unanswered. Did the entire army die in a single storm, or were they separated, dying in smaller groups over days? Are the scattered remains we've found the main force, or just a fraction of the lost soldiers? Why has no mass grave been found? Some archaeologists now theorize the army may have fragmented during the storm, with different units scattered across hundreds of square miles. Others suggest local tribes might have scavenged metal and valuables from exposed remains over centuries, dispersing evidence even further. The truth may lie waiting beneath our feet, under tons of sand that accumulated for 25 centuries. Or the desert may have already reclaimed everything, grinding bronze to dust, scattering bones into geological layers where they'll remain forever indistinguishable from the landscape itself. The Egyptian desert remains what it has always been: magnificent, merciless, and eternal. The sand that buried Cambyses' army has been redistributed countless times, blown into new dunes, compressed into stone, perhaps even carried to distant shores by wind that circles the globe. Those 50,000 men became part of the desert itself. Their calcium enriches the sand. Their bronze oxidizes into the soil. Their ambition and fear, their final prayers and curses have long since dissolved into silence. They marched into history and became geology. The lost army of Cambyses reminds us that empires are temporary, ambition is fragile, and nature's power is absolute. The desert doesn't remember kings or kingdoms. It simply endures. And beneath these shifting sands, 50,000 stories remain untold. A monument not to conquest, but to the humbling truth that we are all eventually reclaimed by the earth.